Welcome back to the field. This week we're going to focus on the volunteer corn that we've noticed checking the fields early this year. You know, we talked last week a little bit about the lack of moisture in January, February that we usually get. And that snowfall really will kind of rot that seed or begin the germination process in the middle of winter. So essentially that seed would rot, or that volunteer corn would rot and not cause a problem. Obviously, we didn't have any snow all winter, and here we are at the end of May, trying to deal or think about dealing with some of our volunteer corn. So obviously, the best case scenario is if we have rotation herbicide where we can spray those labeled herbicides over the top to control some of the volunteer corn. A lot of cases we don't have that. Maybe last year's crop had the Assure trait in it where we can't go over the top and control it. Maybe it's not Liberty Link, which Liberty will probably only get you 40-50% control. It definitely will ding that volunteer corn a little bit, but not total control. So obviously we're looking at a lot of probably cultivation on a lot of these fields to clean up some of the volunteer corn. So as a general rule of thumb, when you're trying to assess volunteer corn, densities, it's obviously pretty difficult because it can be pretty sporadic through the field. A lot of times this year we're seeing obviously higher densities right behind the combine pass from last year. You get in the outer rows of the header, and obviously maybe not as bad there. Then the next thing obviously want to look at is individual plants versus clumps. Obviously clumps are a lot worse, have a lot bigger yield impact in that immediate area around those clumps of volunteer corn. So when we go out and assess, we basically are kind of doing a stand count for volunteer corn. So typically the way we like to do it is measure out that 17.5 feet, just like you would do a normal stand count. Measure that 17.5 feet out, and then count the number of volunteer plants in that 17.5 feet. So that's obviously 1/1000th of an acre. So because some of the thresholds we utilize, like for single plants, we'll typically use 3,500 plants for volunteer corn plants per acre. It kind of by book value would give you about a 2 to 3% yield loss potentially. Obviously that increases when we go from individual plants to clumps. So when we look at this field here, obviously down the row we have some individual plants, then we have a clump. So we easily just stepping this off a little bit, I can tell that we're over that 3,500, probably more like that 6,000 to 7,000 volunteer corn plants per acre. So that's obviously going to give us a yield loss probably up in that 5%, easily that 5% range. So obviously this is a field we're going to try to recommend cultivation in. So I encourage you guys to get out there and do some density stand counts on that volunteer and try to get a plan going forward. So thanks, and we'll see you next week.